Bună seara, bine ați venit la evenimentul nostru de final de an CFA Charter Awards Ceremony și apoi petrecerea de Crăciun. Eu mă numesc Adrian Codirlașu, sunt președintele CFA România și întâi să vă spun câteva cuvinte despre cine suntem noi. Noi suntem CFA Society Romania, asociația celor care au titlul CFA. Titlul CFA, Chartered Financial Analyst, este un titlu larg recunoscut la nivel global în domeniul financiar. Pentru a-l obține se parcurg în 3 examene undeva la 10.000 de pagini. Sunt 3 examene undeva la 5 ore examenul, considerate cele mai brutale examene din industria financiară. Și apoi mai trebuie și experiență practică pentru a obține acest titlu. Deci cei care au acest titlu sunt membrii noștri, suntem undeva la 260 de persoane în asociația din România și peste 250.000 la nivel global. Anual decernăm noile titluri, noilor membri și lăsăm lucrul acesta pe finalul conferinței noastre. Dar întâi aș vrea ca să introduc următoarea discuție, să arăt un sondaj de-al nostru, e făcut în octombrie și întrebam membrii noștri care sunt riscurile pe care le văd în următorul an. Deci, cum spuneam, în octombrie este făcut și care sunt riscurile. Cel mai mare, mă rog, toți ne așteptăm să crească taxele, deci changes in fiscal policy. Apoi, locul 2, recesiune. Vedem cum economia deja decelerează, de la 1 o decelerare suplimentară ajunge în minus. Deci avem acest risc de recesiune. Interesant e numărul 3, care deja îl vedem că se întâmplă. Cum spuneam, sondajul e făcut în ultima săptămână din octombrie. Dezinformarea e numărul 3 ca și risc și tocmai ce am avut un mare episod de așa ceva. Și n-a trecut, aș putea spune, criza financiară pe la ureche. Apoi, următorul risc, partea de public debt distress, deci sustenabilitatea datoriei noastre publice, în contextul deficitului bugetar ridicat pe care îl avem. Iar numărul 4, războiul. Aceste riscuri neeconomice, din afara economiei, de război și dezinformare, au fost votate și de participanții la conferința CFA Investment Conference în primăvară. Deci, cumva, același lucru e văzut nu doar în România, cât și în Europa Centrală și de Est. Și deci, în acest context, colegele mele vor avea un panel interactiv cu tema geopolitică și finanțe și aș dori să le invit pe scenă pe colegele mele, Alexandra și Andreea. Mulțumesc!
Când am organizat acest eveniment, acum 3 luni de zile, nu avem cum să estimăm ce se va întâmpla, dar așa că s-a nimerit la fix. Invităm pe cei 3 invitați speciali alături de noi, domnul general Daniel Petrescu, jurnalistul Edward Lucas, please come here, și domnul profesor Corneliu Bjola.
Thank you for taking this time. We will switch to English and kindly let's use the mic so that we can have a very nice recording of this event. Really excited to have you at this event, really excited to have you in Romania. And when we put together the questions that we sent, we were just thinking about what might happen. And then we realized that some of the events we were very concerned about, they just turned out to be worse than we were expecting. So I would like to start the questions with you, General. We are discussing about a new, maybe Iron Curtain. We were just thinking that this is a concept of the past, but with the recent elections, we just started questioning ourselves on which side of the Iron Curtain would Romania fall. So what do you think is happening in a very broad context, and what is happening in the region when it comes to drawing this line between the East and West?
Good evening. Good evening all, and thank you very much for having me here. It's a pleasure. Considering the slide with risk I saw earlier on, I thought I would be the fourth to start, not the first one, because the risk of having a war is the fourth one. I haven't been introduced regarding my background. I just wanted to mention that I was impressed that to become a part of this community, you need to read at least 10,000 pages. In the period between 2019 and 2024, I used to be the Chief of Defense Staff, which is the highest rank for the military. And there is something similar with what you do, because I had to sign every year 10,000 pages. That was the difference and what gets us to be together. Yeah, there is that famous speech of Churchill regarding, in 46, if I remember correctly, regarding a new iron cart and getting to Europe. I put some thinking into this because I thought many tend to go back to that period of history and to get to the fact that we are reliving some of that period. What was the main point in that? The expansion of the Soviet aggression, the fact that the West need to stay together, the special relationship with the US. Everybody speaks about special relationship with the US, UK mainly, but also if you go throughout Europe, everybody speaks about that special relationship with the US. There were a lot of Soviet tanks in the eastern part of Europe, which I think gave weight to that comparison with an iron curtain. What is now the same and what is now different? It is the same that the Russians think that, like Putin said, that the fall of the Soviet Union was the worst cataclysm geopolitically at the beginning of the 30-some years ago. This is the same. But I think ideology doesn't play that much role as it used at that time. And I think if we look in the Western part, we are more divided than West used to be at that time. So we need to stick together. We need to be realistic about our goals. And again, we need to come to give the proper appreciation to the strategic partnership we have with the US, because it's important that the US stay committed to Europe. So probably you see, for example, what is going on at the border between Poland and Belarus. So you see, preparing for defense and so on. But we have also some other issues like immigration coming. We have another issue of Europe somehow decoupling economically from the US. US is getting way faster in increasing their capacity and productivity and so on. And I'm also worried about a tendency in Europe to support the population, to support the far right or the far left, which I think this is not a good tendency, and we need somehow to educate the people to stay in the middle and to stick to our values.
Thank you. I would like to ask a question to Mr. Lucas, who is a senior editor at The Economist and has been writing a lot about, Eastern Europe, if we can still say that. The question is about Russia, and however, it's related to finance. We are finance specialists. When the sanctions were imposed, there was an expectation that Russia's economy would crumble, that it would cripple with the weight of the financial sanctions especially. However, we have not seen that. We see some things happening. We see Russia moving out of Syria probably because of financial troubles. However, we are not sure what was the effect of those sanctions and what is actually the current state of Russia, how strong it is.
Well, thank you very much. It's 35 years since my first trip here under Ceausescu, and I've come back on many, many occasions, and although you may think you've got problems now, there have been bad problems in the past too, and there are probably worse problems elsewhere. We were getting onto those. So let's keep things in historical and geographical perspective. I think that the sanctions have been a story of Western failure, because if the sanctions had worked, Russia would not still be fighting in Ukraine. We did the sanctions that we felt comfortable with, not the sanctions that would really make Russia so uncomfortable they'd have to stop fighting. And then what makes it worse is we congratulate ourselves for having done what we did. And the price of that is paid by hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians who are dead, maimed, bereaved, traumatized, exiled. And we still haven't really got to grips with what we need to do, which is really to bring the Russian economy to a grinding halt. Now, we could do that. We could say to Microsoft and to Apple, I was just going to say, turn every mobile phone in Russia into a brick. Tell Apple, push out an update that turns every Apple device in Russia into a brick. Tell Microsoft to push out an update that turns every Windows computer in Russia into a brick. That would get Putin's attention. But we didn't want to do that. But the companies didn't want to do that because they said it would be very bad for their brand. So we're stuck. We've got possibly in 2 years' time, Russia's going to run out of money. I'm very skeptical of these predictions, having lived in Russia for a long time. Every winter, people used to say, this is the winter that the Russian infrastructure is going to collapse. Then it didn't. They say, oh yes, but next winter it's going to collapse. And it didn't. So I think that Russia has tremendous reserves drawn at the expense of the country's long-term demographic and economic future. But they've, again and again, when they reach an obstacle, they get round it. They get help from Iran. Maybe the Iranian regime is going to fall. Well, they'll get more help from North Korea or from China. They'll find a way. And the Ukrainians are paying a horrible price for it, while we just dither and congratulate ourselves.
Professor Bjola, we are cheating a bit because this was not on the initial list. But we were so surprised with the results of the elections in Romania, so we really want to understand what is happening with the far right, why it's growing. It's not only about Romania. We were surprised that it reached us, honestly, because the stakes are much higher in France, in Germany, in Italy. So we are seeing far right growing. We now have it in Romania. What is behind it?
Thank you very much for... No, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. And yes, I have to say that it was a shock, a real shock, what I saw happening 2 weeks ago. Interestingly, a few days before the elections here in Romania, I was in Yerevan, Armenia, another country with a lot of troubles, war, disinformation, and I had this conversation with members of the Armenian diplomatic community, and the type of stories they told me, I said, well, you know, I'm so lucky. I live in a different part of the world. But they were Armenians are very resilient. So when you look how many trouble they got into with the war, 100,000 refugees in Yerevan, the threat of Russia hanging there all the time, the economic, you know, from 4 borders, they have only 2 open. Relationship with Turkey, it's a big, and when I ask, who is your best friend? This is Armenia, the first Christian country in the world. And they said, of course, our best friend is Iran. I said, well, it's not of course. Nevertheless, so the point that I'm trying to make is that Armenia, a very resilient country, just tested and tried, you know, several times in the past 10 years. And then I traveled to Bucharest for the elections and also to meet with some friends. And then we have the shock. And I couldn't believe my eyes because you have a country that's been in NATO. We have a country that's been in NATO for 20 years, 2004, 2024. In the European Union for 18 years. So it was not the fact that Russia engaged in this kind of hybrid attack. I expected that. I've seen that happening in the Baltic states, but they were also very resilient. It didn't surprise me at all to see this attack. What surprised me is the lack of resilience. And that takes me to the extreme right. The case of the extreme right. I think, again, there is a phrase sometimes is being used that betrayal is actually the weakness of those who permit this kind of situations. And the extreme right, it was there under our nose for a long time. It was not punished, right? I mean, Georgescu made, this kind of apology for Antonescu and Zelea Curgeanu in 2021. I was telling some people, I was looking at his case in 2021. Part of my academic interest in extreme right online. It was him, there were several others. There was something happening, and that has to do with various networks, nationalist networks, that think, because of the weakness of the states, that they have immunity. They have immunity to engage in this kind of activities. I wouldn't put everything on Russia, although that's clearly the case. I wouldn't put everything on extreme right. I think the lack of resilience is also a problem with this resonance of the message. Why people resonated with this? We know the answer, sort of, right? We know the answer because of what happened with the state, with the political elites, with the thing that, we can move on and do the same thing and nothing will happen. I've been member of the Romanian diaspora for what? I mean, I left the country in 1997, so I know a little bit also about diaspora. Diaspora is not a unified body. It's a mosaic of various communities coming from various generations. Some of them are political, some of them, like any other diaspora, right? Israeli diaspora, Romanian diaspora, Armenian diaspora. There are different reasons, and there are layers of diaspora. What I found always the case with diaspora, nobody comes to talk with them. They come from every 4 years, this kind of big event, and they say a few big words, everything will get better, and then they go back, they come 4 years later. The only people who talk with these members of diaspora in Spain, in Italy, I traveled a little bit at some point, were the members of these parties. So it's not that diaspora is bad, it turned bad, and now it's going to betray the country. It's also about engagement and paying attention to what is going on. I think it's not everything is lost now. I don't think that's the case, but it has to change the mindset for many politicians to understand that if they don't address this problem, we're going to have 10 Georgescu next time. So that's what I wanted to, the message. It's the resilience of society after 20 years of being a member of the Western Bloc. We know that Romania wanted to be part of the Western Bloc. Historically speaking, Romania was made as a result, right? 1859, 1918, it was a result of big European decisions. Every time when we turned east, disaster followed. So resilience is the key word. And even the word resilience has become demonetized. And that's bad. I was part of the various conversations from time to time. People invite me to talk. And when I talk about resilience, they look and they... Because I think the issue of the hybrid warfare was not, I don't know, maybe the general knows more about this, was not taken very seriously. War in public discourse is what happened in Ukraine, destruction, annihilation, that type. Hybrid is sort of, virtual stuff, disinformation, we can cope with that. Well, we show that we cannot cope with this kind of situation, and that has to change. Other countries are resilient. Sweden, I'm going to give an example because I'm connected with the academic networks that develop this kind of capacity of resilience. The Baltics are resilient. UK is also resilient. Made Brexit, it recovered a little bit. I was talking about that, what is going to happen in 5 years. But nevertheless, society is trying to heal itself. Yeah, right. There was a big moment in Geopolitics at that time. Again, another big shock. But what I'm saying is that it's trying to move away from that. We'll see whether that will happen. But again, I'm talking here about the capacity of society to defend itself, and it's not only military, it is at the level of society anticipating this kind of dislocation, political and social. Thank you.
Because you're invited, General Petrescu, to comment a bit on the hybrid war, and then I want to ask you also a question about the bigger picture concerning the realignment between the major powers, the US, obviously, the EU, and China.
Yeah, thank you for that, and thank you for giving the proper attention to the word war and what wars means for societies and what war means for the nations. I have to say, this is the first type of interaction I have with the financial community. And I need to put in front a disclaimer. I'm a military, I should have interacted with you more because I think we both are instruments of statecraft. When I became a strategist lately in my military career, I consider myself a kind of strategist, I started to have this tendency to see everything to the lenses of instruments of national power and what we can do together for the national strategy. I'm not an expert in geopolitics and I'm not an expert in your field of activity. But if we speak about realignment, and China, US, EU, and Russia also we need to consider it as a factor. I would approach it from 2 points of view. One is the geopolitical competition, and the other is the point of view of leadership. Geopolitically, I'm a realist, and I believe that states tend to maximize their power. Is the relative power of the states that determine their action, their strategy, and the way they pursue the national interest. I mentioned economics and military as two instruments of statecraft. This is also an informational. There is also a soft power every state has, but there are two more categories of power. One is a structural power, and another one is something we call sticky power. Structural means the capacity to influence the system, the way the international system is organized, in order to pursue your objective. As the sticky power, it's that capacity of a state to get somebody close and to maintain that state close to their objectives. So what is going on right now between United States and China, EU and Russia, is the issue that we have some powers that try to address this structural and this sticky power the West still has. And it wouldn't be a problem, in my opinion, to address this. The problem is that they are using the military instrument of power in order to address this. So relationship and realignment between US and China will be based on this geopolitical tendency and what their leaders believe that they have the capacity, what assumptions they made, they have the capacity to change this structural power and this sticky power of the West. But there are areas when they need to work together. It's the climate change. Of course, we can have issues regarding how we deal with trade. We can have issues regarding how we deal with artificial intelligence, how we deal with 5G. But climate change is something that concerns everybody of us, and we need to pay attention for that. So I think it will be a kind of back and forth, and will depend very much on the leadership. Trump in the US, I think it will be a big factor regarding how the situation will unfold. I will not make any prediction, just to add that in a multipolar world, states behave differently than in unipolar world. So we are going to see a lot of tendencies around us, in my opinion.
True, and actually we are seeing some countries, the BRICS, trying to come together to bring some alternative to the dollars. I saw you, Mr. Lucas, that you were pointing out something, and I also want to ask you to continue on this idea of what the new Trump administration will bring in terms of external policy, what will happen in the relation with the EU, if some of the policies will be reversed from the Biden administration.
Thank you. I think we tend to obsess and blame the Trump administration for problems that are clearly nothing to do with the Trump administration. It's not the Trump administration's fault that we didn't put proper sanctions on Russia. It's not the Trump administration's fault that Europe doesn't spend enough on defense. It's not the Trump administration's fault that our centrist politicians screw up and people vote for populists. These are all things that we do to ourselves. It's not the Trump administration's fault that Europe has lost a lot of credibility in the so-called global south. And most of all, it's not the Trump administration's fault that we are losing the war that is being fought right now, and that's the war in the grey zone. I don't quite like the word hybrid. You can call it sub-threshold or grey zone, or the old Russian phrase aktivní мероприятия, active measures, or political warfare. But all this stuff that's going on right now, whether it's election interference, which you've just seen in this country, whether it's the sabotage and arson attacks that are happening all across Europe, the cyber attacks that are happening, the attempts to intimidate, beat up, kidnap and murder Kremlin critics, destroying undersea cables in the Baltic states, all that's going on right now, and we don't really have an answer to it. NATO is maybe configured okay, though I'd say not quite well enough, for the unlikely event of an all-out conventional military conflict with Russia. But that's not really relevant. That's not what's happening right now. We don't have proper defense. I agree very much with the General that some countries are well defended. I particularly actually highlight Finland as being the exemplar. But Finland's been doing this for 70 years, and we're not going to get to Finnish levels of defense in the hybrid or grey zone quickly. So that puts a huge emphasis on our ability to deter Russia, to make the Russians think, ouch, that hurt, I better not do that again. And we don't really have that. We don't have deterrence measures in the grey zone, and the result is this is escalating. And this is why it really matters. These are not actually attacks on our infrastructure or our institutions or our individuals. They're attacks on our decision-making. The aim is to make us do things differently, do things the way Russia wants. And the thing that really worries me is that we're going to see attacks on specific countries in this grey zone, which will be really devastating. And those countries will say, this is Article 5, we're at war, we need to do stuff, we need to fight back. And the rest of NATO, maybe some of it, maybe all of it, maybe the United States, maybe Germany, are going to say, hang on a moment, this is just a limited attack and it needs a limited response. And that's what the Kremlin is exploiting at the moment, and I'm really worried about that.
How would you respond to that? With cutting the cables, for example?
We can get on to I don't want to hog the panel. This is not a lecture. This is
Okay, we'll get back to the questions shortly. We just have a few more, and then we'll open up to the audience. The next question is for Professor Bjola, because we mentioned already climate change, which is definitely a big thing happening around us. There isn't a consensus among financiers, economists about the impact. We see some inflation related to this. We see some inequality in the impact in various countries. What will this bring in the next years for either the large powers or the small countries? How this energy transition, let's call it like that, how will it realign the powers?
On the question of climate change, I think already see the impact in various ways in Europe and not only. I think the debate in the academic field is that things are likely to get much worse. The time frame varies. You may say 5 years, 10 years. And then the question is what worse means. Worse could mean question of, there is already a little bit of that, climate refugees, people who live in countries that fail because agriculture doesn't work, fail because, there is instability. So there is something of that. Do we see a lot of that? Not yet. There is also the question of how to cope with that. Europe, for instance, has a strategy. It was very ambitious. And you see the impact at the moment, especially again with the populists using that as a point of political battle, because it affects communities. It affects farmers, it affects business. So there is a tendency to overlook, to ignore, and to kick the can down the road. We've been doing that for 20 years. It's not something that... and that brings, what kind of resilience, energy resilience is necessary, and what to do about this. I will add something to this. It's the question of the digital economy, which I think is very connected also with this issue of energy transition. The big buzzwords, so my field of expertise, in addition to this, it's also the role of digital technologies and impact international affairs. The big buzzword nowadays is digital infrastructures. That has to do with cables to a certain extent, has to do with data centers, because these are the powers, the drivers that power the digital economy. And what is interesting about this data center, they require a lot of energy. The big ones at the moment, there are big cities like Amsterdam, like London, like Frankfurt. They are moving a little bit towards Madrid and Vienna. I was checking a little bit the situation in Romania. It's very weak. And partly because, there is a lack of energy to support this kind of infrastructure. Why is that important? Because it's a digital economy, it creates, I think probably there is opportunity for business to think ahead. Because with the structure, with an infrastructure of data centers, this is an amazing appeal for companies to come, to work for the digital economy. The second aspect, which again I think it's related a little bit to this, is the space sector. Again, big buzzwords, I'm just saying, I know, been talking with some government organization, and they want to understand better what is happening in the space sector. And there are interesting aspects that, especially at the European level, with this Musk type of mini satellites, Europe has invested in the Iris constellation, which is supposed to go ahead with this. And why is that important? Again, because through this mini satellite, it's not only about telecommunication, it's also to do with agriculture, has also to do with environmental sustainability. So how to think about this? I think it's important not to think where the puck is, as it used to, but where it's going to move. And with this attraction, this idea that digital economy is likely to grow, the question of digital infrastructure, I think, has to be taken more seriously. And on this point, I think there is a lot of, I think there is not much, especially in the Romanian economy, with respect to this. I think there's something to think about, and might help a little bit with this energy sustainability and resilience of how to think ahead, maybe 5 years, 10 years from now, and not to be taken by surprise when things are moving in this direction. Thank you.
Thank you. I think with this question, we go on to the questions about reconstruction of Ukraine, and I would like to ask General Petrescu as well as Mr. Lucas to comment on the magnitude, what it could mean for us, for the EU.
Excellent question for a military. Reconstruction, thank you for that. It's good we talk about reconstruction of Ukraine because this means that we think for the period post-war. But in the meantime, we have to consider that the war is going on in Ukraine. And as we speak, people are dying in Ukraine. This is something we would not have imagined to happen in the 21st century in Europe, that very close to us. And this is very unfortunate because Russia started this aggression, which is illegal and is very brutal. So this is the point from where we need to start. Another point, in order to get to the reconstruction, we need this war to finish with Ukraine achieving their objectives. There is no way not to influence Europe and the peace in Europe if Russia achieves their objectives in Ukraine. I think the end of the war in Ukraine, it's up to the Ukrainians to decide how they finish this war. It's up to us to be on the right side of the history and to continue to support them as long as it's necessary. And I think reconstruction after the war ends, it's also part of our responsibility. We need to contribute to that. And I would approach that from the point of view of Romania. You know, militarily, we have provided support. We said official multidimensional support Romania has provided to Ukraine, and I will not get into more details regarding that. It is an advantage for us that we have a good position, not only to provide this support and to be a transit for the support, but also for the economic aid after that. I think we have the capacity to mobilize natural resources, but we also have to put some resources into supporting Ukraine. It's not going to be, only resources coming from the other and us being a transit. In my opinion, I'm not a specialist, I'm not an economist, but I think we'll have a fair share of contributing to that. But I see opportunities because this will strengthen the strategic partnership, the partnership we have with Ukraine. This will strengthen our position in the civilized world, in the West, because we are on the right side of history and we are supporting, and we do what is necessary, the way we did with the refugees, the way we did with all the other issues, the way we did in supporting not only Ukraine, but the Republic of Moldova. This is something I think that comes natural, and we have to do that. How we mobilize for that, it will be a matter of leadership. I would not comment very much on that. I think it's a lot of potential to be unlocked, but it depends on the leadership.
Well, I hope there will still be a Ukraine to reconstruct, but they're being smashed to pieces at the moment. And I think there's a danger, it's not a certainty, but there's a danger that President Trump arm twists Ukraine into a ceasefire deal which leaves the rest of Ukraine as unsustainable. What's left of Ukraine after the deal, whatever it is, needs to be investable. To be investable, it needs to be secure. To be secure, it needs to be protected against future Russian aggression. And that will mean very strong Western, not just guarantees, but boots on the ground. I just wonder how many people in the audience would support Romanian troops being deployed to Ukraine as part of a ceasefire peacekeeping deal. I see 1, 2, 3, about half, maybe not quite half the audience. And you've got skin in the game. I suspect if we were having this...
With some TikTok, we can get 90%.
Perfect. Well, we're going to put you in charge of TikTok. But, if it was Spain, I suspect it'd be less, to be honest. So I really worry about this. I think the danger is we get a dirty ceasefire with weak security guarantees, and Putin comes back for second helpings. The big lesson of this war is one that Putin's already won. he showed that nuclear blackmail worked. We, particularly the American administration, but also the Germans and others, were so scared of nuclear war that we didn't actually want Ukraine to win. We didn't give them the weapons they needed to win. We just gave them the weapons they needed to lose slowly. And that's a terrible lesson. It's taught other countries all around the world. If you want to be safe, you need nuclear weapons. Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, discussions going on there very quietly. Actually, I hear in Europe countries talking about how long would it take us to get nuclear weapons if we don't have the American nuclear guarantee anymore. So that's terrifying. But even more terrifying is it leaves Russia on the front foot. Putin thinks I got away with it. May take 2 bites rather than 1, but I'm getting what I want. And who's next?
Next.
So was I going to be gloomy and you cheerful, or was it the other way around, General? I can't remember.
We do welcome our new members into the
Yes.
CFA Study Romania Association, so it's not always like this, it's just the context. It is like this. We do tend, we issue this confidence indicator that my colleague Adrian showed you, and we do tend to be more pessimist about it, indeed. Professor Bjola, my next question was about the opportunities Armenia has, economic opportunities. I think you already touched on those. So I will switch it a little bit. And so for political order, we need political order. We saw what it means to be out of order. You would need strong state, rule of law, and political accountability. Where do you think we are failing? Are we failing in all these areas? What is not happening in Romania? Why? Because in terms of economic, it depends on how you measure, of course. In terms of economic development, we are catching up, but what is happening where we are failing in terms of political order?
No, thank you very much. I should add also something else to the idea of the digital infrastructure. I really believe this is something of great interest. So before Yerevan, I was in Qatar, in Doha, talking about digital infrastructures. I just wanted to highlight the idea of digital infrastructures on the mind of many. And that has to do with data center. There is also another word, hyper data center. There is nothing in the region in different places. Checking today, I noticed an announcement coming from the European Commission. They allocated funding, 1.5 billion euros, for 7 AI factories in Europe, in 15 member states. Guess who is not part of that? But they are part of the AI factory. Romania is collaborating with Spain, who has been granted funding for developing AI factories. Right? That sounds interesting. But for AI factories to develop, again, we go back to data center, digital infrastructures, and that probably explains why Romania didn't get that particular project. So just wanted to highlight, because there is a huge opportunity here in terms of resetting these parameters of the digital economy. On the question of order, we had, I think, this trying to compare always, in the past few years, Republic of Moldova with Romania. A few years ago, I completely written off Republic of Moldova. I said it's gone. It's not going to come back. It's already under the thumb of Russia. We know the problems, the institutional framework, and all of the corruption. And then all of a sudden, guess what? They started to come back and develop their system, and they are cleaning up. What is happening is not easy. We're going to see what happens next year. But it's a very interesting contrast. A country that had little, comparing with Romania, managed to basically be very resilient, right? They faced an attack 1 month before us, right? And they managed to cope with that. And I wonder how to explain this contrast. I mean, the easy way is that we got it too easy, right? All the money from Europe, everything, NATO umbrella. And then, it started to fall asleep. Got it too easy. But when people face adversity, then something happens. You have this kind of leaders emerging that don't take things for granted. I had the pleasure to meet Maya Sandu twice. I was surprised, probably you know her as well.
Maybe we can import her.
No, Maya Sandu, I mean, it's a very interesting because it's a different type of leader. Usually there are two types of leader. One which is very vocal, you know, and try to push things very hard, whether the people follow him or not, doesn't matter. And the other one which tries to talk with everyone to bring them on board. And Maya Sandu has this kind of style. It worked. It really worked. So I think what the message here with the political, you can put all kinds of institutions. You can bring the federal checks and balances from the United States and import into Romania. You can bring, you know, the UK system and import into Romania. It doesn't matter as long as the people that needs to fill the institutions are not in the right place. So getting people, I made some, you know, getting people in place. I think the selection is not a selection, it's a contra-political selection, because as we know, the people who are pushed in different positions are the nephews and, you know, the mistresses and all the other stuff. And that has negative implication. I remember a case 2 years ago, Mr. General, there is an institution, Rome Arm, which is supposed to sell, to facilitate trade of weapons, import, export, right? And then there was something in the press that the head of that organization used to sell insurance a few years ago. His license for selling insurance was revoked because of fraud. He was involved in some sort of scandal of selling PP.
Don't look at me. This
No.
I can confirm only that there is Romar.
Raw arm, the institute. So you can put Pentagon in that place. As long as you bring these kind of people to run the institution, the effect will be the same. So I think there is a need here, and probably that was a signal, positive signal for this election. Change the people. Bring them, you know, those who have some certain degree of competence. They don't deliver, take them out, remove them from power. This is what Maya Sandu, you know, is doing right now. Right? If you want to put different institutions, but need to fill them with people who can deliver, who are not connected to this kind of, you know, shadowy groups. It can be done, of course it can be done. But maybe the shock from the elections will force parties to do this. Or maybe some new political forces will come along and see, but you know, new political forces is always trouble. They are untested, they start squabbling. So that will be probably not the institutions, but the people that have to change. I have also to, because I said the same thing in a different context, let's also be a little bit optimistic. Why so? Because in 1990s, you remember there was no political class. The political class, not very sophisticated. Somehow, in spite of that, Romania managed to move, get into the EU. The difference in the NATO, the difference from the 90s to today is that the geopolitical at that time was favorable. So you can make huge mistakes, it didn't matter. You still can get in EU, in NATO, and so on. Now the geopolitical context is hostile. You cannot play any longer with people like the head of ARM and others of the same kind, because you burn yourself badly. So that's my view. Thank you.
Can I add something? Not to defend Romarm, that because I like what you said, that what we need in the state in order to perform, that, you know, democracy, rule of law, market economy, and so on. I think there is something also more important. We need in the nation individuals that like life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And I think we are failing to educate new generation regarding these ideals, life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And this is why, you know, other ideologies or going far right and far left can work on the minds of the people, because we are failing to educate them more towards the ideals that were the ideals of our generation and the ideals in 1989 and so on. So I would totally agree with that and add this. Thank you.
I would also like to ask for questions from the audience.
Thank you for the presentation. I have one question. We are talking about the geopolitical risk and the impact on the Romanian finance and people's money, basically. So basically we are here as CFA, we are the most professional, if you want to say, in terms of finance in Romania, if you want to take it like this. So how can we protect ourselves and Romanian people from any impact from geopolitical risk that can happen? So we can deny that things are good or bad, but people, they don't know exactly if their money is safe or it's not safe.
The safety of investments always depends on having very strong institutions, and every one of us can contribute to the strength of institutions by respecting them in our daily lives and holding them to account when they fall short. So in the end, the active, public-spirited citizenry is the kind of soil in which a strong institution grows. But I was asked a question by the gentleman in the front about what to do. So imagine you are the countries around the Baltic Sea, Nordics, Baltics, Poland, Germany, and you've got these a Chinese ship. In fact, on two separate occasions, Chinese ships have dragged their anchors, not just for a little bit, but for between 100 miles on one occasion and 300 miles on another occasion, along the ocean, the seabed, and they've destroyed these data cables. What do you do? And it's tricky, because under international law, you can't just seize, this is not Pirates of the Caribbean, you can't just seize a ship because you don't like it. If we do that, and maybe that's what the Chinese would love, they will then do the same to Western ships around Taiwan. We've just abandoned the international law of the sea, which is one of the fragile legal instruments that keeps Taiwan safe and other places safe as well. So the natural response is, if you like, the symmetric response. Ship did bad thing, do bad thing to ship. That's not going to work. That would be a trap. So we have to do other things. So what can we do to put pressure on Taiwan and on China? The thing that China really hates is anyone being nice to Taiwan. So just imagine if Germany, Poland, Sweden, Finland, Denmark all said, we all have offices in Taiwan. They are trade, cultural offices. We don't make a big deal about it. We're all sending an extra official there. And guess what? That official is going to be a military attaché. Bang! Suddenly you've got Beijing's attention. You might also say it's the Dalai Lama's 90th birthday this summer, and he's a great spiritual leader, internationally revered. And so we in honor of our Buddhist population, we'll be making appropriate provisions for a big celebration of the Dalai Lama's birthday. Bang! You've really got Beijing's attention now. Now, there's not a lot they can do about it. Every big country has offices in Taiwan. It's not a breach of the One China policy. And also, they can't take individual sanctions back, because it's a whole bunch of countries doing it. Big countries, Germany, Poland, Sweden. It's not like little Lithuania sort of shaking its tiny fist at China. So that's one thing. And then next time the Russians ask the Chinese to do them a favor and go and destroy something, the Chinese may say, actually, you know what, Boris, or Vladimir, it caused us a lot of trouble last time. Now, another thing we could do is go after the 300 billion in Russian central bank assets. Now, we need to change the law in order to seize them. We froze them already. But just imagine those 6, 7 countries said, we're all going to our parliaments, ask them to pass a law saying that we can legally seize those assets, and we're going to encourage our allies to do it too. Bang! You just got Russia's attention as well.
I want to thank for the question, because he asked how can he help. This means he cares. Coming here to talk about finance and geopolitics, I ask myself, who influences what? Is geopolitics influencing the finance, or the finance influencing the geopolitics? And the artificial intelligence responded that they both influence each other. So think how finance can influence geopolitics, reform the financial institutions, direct the investments towards the area that can help us in the geopolitical struggle and help us educate the new generation in that domain. I would say, 3 ways, how can you help? Thank you.
Answer to the question about how to protect the money. My answer, I don't know whether you like it, because you need to spend money. You need to spend money, invest money in the military and security. I think that's the safest bet. Not only 2%, and sorry to to make your case here, but I think the best probably protection that in the past 2 weeks we had in Romania was that anti-ballistic missile shield from the Veselu. That actually, it anchors you to big allies that will never abandon you because they require that type of presence, a military presence. And that has to be done again, not only with the Americans, but also with the Europeans. That's a different discussion. So investing in your security, one thing is that it makes deterrence stronger, investing in a smart way, right? Not wasting money for things that are not contributing to defense.
Like aircraft carriers.
But investing, bringing allies, supporting this kind of presence, that ties you, and I think this makes you stronger deters the presence. Has to be done the same with Republic of Moldova. Republic of Moldova, it's a buffer zone at the moment. We don't know which way it'll go. But it shouldn't be abandoned again. And that type of security protection has to be extended in unequivocal terms, without hesitation to Moldova. That would be probably a task for the next government or president. Another good investment. So having this kind of stability, and yes, in short term, I think in long term, we can think also of institution, changing the political class. But probably the safest bet is to spend money on the military because the geopolitical context is really horrible. And it's not going to change in the next 5-10 years. That's my perspective here.
Hi. Thank you as well for your comments tonight. Coming back a bit to Romanian politics. So looking forward to the next 4 years, so the next elections, would you say that the far-right movement will be more popular or less popular than it is today? And as a follow-up, what should a potential, let's say, pro-NATO, pro-EU coalition government should and could do to make sure that the far-right movement will not keep growing?
Well, as the only non-Romanian, I think, in the entire room, I'm by definition, the least qualified person to answer this. But I think that I do look at, ever since 1989, I've been travelling up and down this region, observing elections and watching what's going on. And there's a pretty standard pattern, which is that the bad guys win when the so-called good guys screw up. And the so-called good guys screw up by being corrupt, by being incompetent and being lazy. And if you have corrupt, incompetent, lazy politicians in the centre, then it makes it a lot easier for the extremes. So I don't have any skin in this game, but I think most of the people who vote for far-right parties, whether it's in Germany or here or wherever, are not actually convinced by every comma and every word in the manifesto of or the programme of the far-right party. They're saying, I'm fed up. I'm fed up with politicians who don't talk to me. I'm fed up with politicians who are lining their own pockets. I'm fed up with politicians who promise one thing and then do another or do nothing at all. And that's not a Romanian problem. That's a problem of democracy all over the place. Indeed, I would say it's in America as well. I'm probably the only person in this room who went door-knocking for Kamala Harris in Pennsylvania. And I can tell you, after a couple of hours of talking to Americans, I was convinced she was going to lose, and I felt she deserved to.
I think the answer to the question, it depends on the lessons that will be drawn from the current moment. I wrote a piece a few days ago in which I highlighted a theme which was mentioned also in American context, but I think has become quite visible in the Romanian context. All the people here in this room, myself included, we are part of a Romania which is very modernist, very well settled economically. We feel comfortable in Europe. We travel every week. We read books. We participate in interesting events. We like that, right? There is a similar case in UK. There is a similar case in the United States. There is the people who basically benefited a lot from what happened in the 35 years. And yeah, your vacations, your engagements, your participation. And there is another Romania that we saw it 2 weeks ago, which is quite unhappy. Is not very urban like us, is not much interested in all the European thing, doesn't care to visit Florence or Berlin, is very much engaged in local, it feels marginalized economically, and this cleavage that we saw exploding 2 weeks ago needs to be addressed. Now the big question is how to reconnect these two parts of the country. The one which, and that's always been the case, right? I mean, if you think about Romania 1920s, 30s, you have this kind of very modernist, very forward-looking part of Romania, very Europeanized, and more traditional Romania. It's the same. So there is work to be done in terms of reconnecting them. What reconnecting them, it was 1989, because there was a moment that we all felt, and then gradually that crack between these two layers started to grow and grow and grow, and exploded in our face 2 weeks ago. The question is how to do it. I mentioned Brexit because Brexit exposed that crack as well in the UK British society. It took some time. I don't think it's fully fixed at all. But there are some attempts. We'll see whether the experiment will work. We see the same crack in Germany in a different context. So I think the answer is that likely to become more, in the next round, to see this populist movement growing? Definitely. If this connection, if this gap is left unchecked. And I don't think it's only economic in the sense that if you throw social benefits after social benefits, I think it's also about opportunities, having opportunities at the level in which they think that their life makes sense, in a sense. I talked again, I have my diaspora experience, I talk in many diaspora, not necessarily from my bubble. And the stories I heard are, again, is that part of Romania which you don't necessarily know. People who left their home, their kids' home, they went to Italy, they didn't. So these are social traumas that have to be fixed. So there is economic, there is social aspect, and there is also the cultural, the education. We all know, but most of you probably have kids, and myself, in British institutions or German, they don't. So I'm not trying to find excuses for this, but you have to understand, because if nobody talks to them, guess who is talking to them? All this populist movement, extremists, religious fundamentalists, and they are going to provide a narrative that will make this traditionalist Romania even stronger. And next time around, it will be even worse. So I think there's a need to realize this divide and try to find a way to reconnect economically, socially, but also culturally at the level of opportunities in terms of education. Thank you.
My name is Corneliu. I live in
receive some alerts on our mobile phones that some drones are in the air. And then we hear some planes, military planes probably, flying over. And I would like to ask a question mainly for General Petrescu. If this is the proper way to respond to Russian drones probing our aerial defenses, or should we do something else? Thank you.
Regarding the Russian drones, as a former military, I can tell you that the military can do what the political side of the House decides to do. It's up to the politicians to set the law, the legal framework, and the rules of engagement regarding how you deal with that threat. So that would be the answer of the military. Now going to the situation, what is going on. I was one of the persons that pushed for the system to work and the population to be informed. We have never been the target of the Russian drones. What we had in Romania, we had either drones that were hit by the air defense and then got into our airspace, either other drones that got into our airspace, and I cannot explain the reason. Why? Just to test the system, let's say to test the system, not to look for targets on our territory. How we deal with that? We have the capacity. The actual chief of defense came publicly and he said we need a law, and that law it's still, I'm not sure right now, either in the parliament or with the government, to decide the reaction on that drones. The fact is that we have to answer based on the law. And when things happen, you are asked by the law what you did. So the reaction, this explains the reaction we are having right now. Regarding the planes, yes, there are procedures. They get into the air, you know, for air defense and so on. But engaging, you need to, at least for the moment, you need to demonstrate a hostile intent. And this is very difficult under current legal circumstances.
One of the problems we've got is that there are other countries who have not been so lucky. Latvia, for example, actually had a Russian drone landing in its territory. And there are countries that really want to shoot these drones down. The Polish foreign minister complained publicly. He said it's our constitutional duty to shoot down whether it's missiles or planes that are threatening our airspace. They have the legal basis in other countries. And the reason they don't is the Americans won't let them. I've spoken to officials who say we're looking at our radar screens, working out what to do, and we get a phone call from Washington saying, don't shoot it down. And I've talked to Americans about this, and they say, we don't want those crazy East Europeans starting World War III. So this is a huge change. America used to be the spine stiffener, the country was trying to make the Europeans get their act together. We're now in a different world where you've got frontline states from Finland in the north down to here who would like to be tougher. And you've got Washington saying, hold fire.
Do you think that would change with Trump?
I fear it's just the same with Trump, or even worse. I mean, I blame Jake Sullivan and Biden for this, but I spoke to a person close to the Trump, with the Trump White House, who said, if you think we're going to risk nuclear war for a field in southern Lithuania, you're very much mistaken. For the Lithuanians, a field in southern Lithuania is exactly what they will go to war for, because it's their field, and it happens to be the field that connects them to Poland.
So my question is, I've heard many times over the past years the words of populism and of the rise of far right. But what if what we see now, it's a big trend change? Because over the past 60 years, what we have seen, perhaps starting 1968, we have seen the so-called progressist policies. And what if now it's an important trend change, and perhaps it has started on the 5th of November 2024, where Donald Trump was re-elected US president. and when the Republican Party has won, surprisingly, the popular vote. So what if what we see, what we started to see in Argentina elections, in Netherlands election, in Austrian elections, most importantly in the US elections? What if that is not populism, that is not the rise of far right? It's just a big trend change from progressist policies of the past 60 years to a new way of conservatism, conservatism.
I'm going to be optimistic here. This is just political competition. You know, if you have a business and it's not making money and it doesn't have any customers, then it won't make money. And if it can't borrow it from the bank, it goes bust. I know it's more complicated than this. You guys have all studied it, but that's basically it. And it's this, and we live in a, thank goodness, we live in a competitive political environment, and there is a price to failure. And the price to failure is sometimes painful and messy and quite scary, but that's the way the system delivers a message that you need to fix things. Now, I look at the Democrats and I think, I'm not sure, guys, you've completely digested the reason that Trump won in the first place, and you don't seem to have digested the reason why he's won now, but that's the message the system is sending you. Do better, work harder, say more interesting things, put up better candidates. So I think, in a way, it's always unpleasant at the time when you get these political shocks, just like bankruptcies, unpleasant. But thank goodness we have a system where that message gets delivered. If we were in North Korea, we'd be offered a choice between Kim, Kim or Kim, and Kim would win.
I don't know whether the past 50 years were progressive. I mean, it has become a very, the word progressive, the progressive has become very tainted. I think there were liberal parties, there were centrist parties. Europe was made by Christian Democrats and Social Democrats, not by communists and fascists. So, on one hand, what we see nowadays in many countries, and probably here as well as a result, what we saw is that the center does not hold, and that's not good news. Look, in Germany, I think Christian Democrats are still surviving. That is, they are far away from the 40% that used to get. Social Democrats are in free fall. On the extreme left, you have all kind of dubious parties, never heard, a combination of extreme right and extreme left. The Alliance for, what's the name? Zara Wagner. And then you have AfD. So I think the center is the problem with the center. Again, here you look at Liberal Party and the Social Democrats. These are generally seen as centrist party with all the sins, right, that we all know. So you have to think then, why is the center falling? I'm not going to buy the story about LGBTQ and all this thing. I understand that, that's a lot of Russian pumped out, that I've seen it everywhere. I've seen it in Georgia, I've seen it in Armenia, I've seen it, pumped up. And when you ask people, when is the last time when met, they cannot answer. So there is a lot of propaganda fuel there. What I think it's the problem is the issue of the middle class. When you have a strong middle class, the center thrives. Nobody wants to support extreme left, extreme right. When the middle class shrinks, and that might be the case with Trump, when the middle class, because Democrats always win in those rich states, New York, California, this is where the money is. But in the middle, so when the middle class shrinks, you have a problem, historically speaking. So there is an issue then, how to how to get back on track, what new opportunities, how to increase, middle class is not only made by middle class, people like you with their own business, that they need to grow, they need to hire, they need to develop, they need to stay competitive. That's the middle class. And when the middle class is stable, right? So just to say more optimistic, you're already recruiting new members, right? So the middle class is growing, so that's a good sign. But I think that's the issue that probably has to stay on the mind of the next government. Yes, there is a layer that is suffering badly, and they need to be assisted in get back on track. But I think taxing to middle class too much, it creates exactly the opposite effect. It has to grow. It's a generation. Yeah. I'm looking around. I don't see old people here. So it's
We are not representative. We are not the same.
Can I just make one very brief point? Another thing is that people may campaign from the populist fringes, but in power they tend to govern from the centre. So look at Italy, the Five-Star Movement, which was meant to be against every tradition of the Italian Republic, completely new start, turned into a sort of boring centrist party and then imploded. Meloni, Brothers of Italy, supposedly fascist, now with some reservations on the social side, governing as a very impressive and reliable centre-right leader. So I think facts have events push people towards the centre, even if they campaign during the election on the fringes.
I have a question to Professor Bjola. You talked a lot about resilience, and I actually couldn't agree more with you on with your comments on that. So my question to you is, how do you think we can strengthen the resilience of Romanian people? And is it something that can be taught or trained, or is it just something that's impregnated in the genes of a nation?
Well, I don't think it's, I think there are certain measures, economic measures probably, that already covered some of them about the role of the middle class, around the role of growing the economy, around the importance of reconnecting with the more traditional area of the society. But in terms of the hybrid warfare, I mean, there are some tested ways in which you can think about. I mentioned Sweden for a reason, because they developed, interestingly, Sweden, which is, quite remotely placed, an institute for psychological preparation. I'm connected a little bit with the people working there. It's very important. It's more like a research institute, but connected to the government. And what they do, they provide, so what they monitor all the time, this type of hybrid warfare. Tactics, method, approaches, all the time. They try to understand, because part of the hybrid warfare is to identify buttons in the society that you can push. Some of them, as we see, more cultural. Cultural warfare works perfectly, not everywhere. And then you have to tailor messages. So this Resilience Institute that exists in Sweden, I'm more familiar with their work, this is why I'm mentioning it, but I think it's a good example. There is another one in Finland. So what they try to do is to monitor, to understand, and then to act or to react. The reacting part is also interesting, because it has to be done with this concept of whole of society, not whole of government, in which different institutions are expected to intervene in the process at different stages. So let's take the example what happened last week with these mercenaries and so on. Where is the best point of intervention? At what level? Should the Prime Minister make a declaration? Should the Minister of Interior, or maybe at the local level where this... so there is this kind of discussion all the time. Who is supposed, the entire society, how to react to this kind of events? I've done a study in the past, I published it on Finland. Finland exposed to this kind of issues all the time. Migration, using migrants, giving them bicycle to cross the border, And then there was all kind of negative stories about sexual exploitation and so on. And every time when a story emerged, then there was an actor. It was part of their resilience plan. Who is supposed, if we have a story like this, who is supposed to intervene immediately? Maybe the local hospital, if it was an incident that had to do with some sort of local context. And all the time they wanted to have credible authorities. You don't go there with people who don't know how to communicate, that they are not. So there is thinking behind this. It's not foolproof, but it's a beginning. You have to understand your weaknesses. I think all of us do this kind of exercise all the time, especially US business. What's your weakness in your business? Right? How to protect yourself from that. You have to do this exercise at the level of society, especially knowing that you are in a very dramatic geopolitical context. Borrow from others, how they've dealt with that, what kind of authorities. In Finland, for instance, again, part of the resilience program, they started introducing it in schools, year 5, year 4. Kids, they're learning how to distinguish between fake news and truth. So it's like mathematics, right? Discipline that they study. And there are games that they, look, this is how you have to understand the source. It's part of the resilience. This is why it's called whole of society. There are 5 million people in the Finns, but they had history with Russians and they know what to expect. Part of their resilience is also investment in security. They have a brilliant military, very well endowed with, latest. I don't want to, I was there in Helsinki a few years ago, and just to conclude and say, well, what are you working in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs? And say, what are new projects that you are working now? And that was 2015. We just commissioned new studies about existential threats. What? These are the type of gloomy perspective, so it's part of their history that they experience very bad things with Russia, and they are prepared, and they invest, and they learn, and they apply, and then they readjust. This is what you have to do. This is what we have to do the same, right? We got used with good things, NATO shield, European money, but again, I'm bringing these examples. When you face adversity, then your senses become very intense. You have to defend yourself. Not to say, well, it will go away next week. We can have another go and we'll see. No, you have to realize that, it's a life and death situation. Yeah. So that's my thing. Borrow from those who actually, Sweden, Finland, whole of society approach with studies, credible authorities, good communicators, they teach communication. So those who go there to speak with the public, they are not picked up, from the street. They are trained. Look, these are the type of. I know also about Ukraine, after how much they invested in communication in 2016 when Kuleba was Minister of Strategic Communication. After they faced the problem, the annexation of Ukraine, they realized that it's not only about bullets, it's also about communication. You need to learn how to communicate in order to maintain trust and to maintain support from your allies. And now it's a big problem, by the way. Probably, if you follow the European newspapers and probably other, everybody is looking at Romania. What is going on? Our ally. It's like, the weakest link of the weakest. That's an opportunity, right? That's an opportunity to, again, come back, to communicate, to see, to restore confidence. Otherwise,
with your permission, I will comment a little bit on resilience, because as a military, we were also very interested in resilience, meaning by resilience the capacity to absorb a shock and to recover and to be able to continue to perform. I'm, I think Romanian people, it's very resilient, a resilient people. But we cannot, count only on this. Resilience we can educate, we can regulate, we can practice, we can test. What about a good law regarding the preparation of the national territory for defense? This needs to be updated. What about a good law regarding the preparation of the population for defense? This needs to be updated. What about getting together all the institutions in protecting critical infrastructure? So we have many things we can do in order to improve that resilience.
Good evening. My name is Liviu Popescu. I'm a journalist at Ziarul Financiar. Two quick questions, if I may. First one, do you think that there are only the Russians are behind the interferences we've seen lately, because direct exposure allegedly in Romania would be a risk even for them, risking because they tend to do things from the shadow. So that's my first question. And my second one for Mr. Edward Lucas, you've mentioned the possibility of a dangerous ceasefire deal in Ukraine. Nevertheless, a ceasefire. What would it mean for Romania in the coming years? Let's say that tens of billions of dollars would flow into Ukraine via Romania, if that's a possibility. Thank you.
I think the first thing you need to worry about is millions of refugees fleeing Ukraine, actually. I think if Ukraine really breaks, if the heating and power grid break this winter, that could be several million people heading west. And if the front breaks and people think that Ukraine's going to be unlivable in the future, it'll be somewhere between Bosnia and Somalia in terms of outcome, then you'll have a lot more people coming. So that'll be a very big worry. I think in the good scenario, where we get a sovereign, sustainable Ukraine with strong security guarantees and Russia goes off to lick its wounds for years or longer, then you have a very big, strong neighbor growing very fast, and obviously that'll be good for you in lots of other ways. With regard to your first question, I would contest the idea that Russia operates in the shadows. Russia operates in an amazingly brazen way. They make very little effort to cover their tracks, actually, in these grey zone. If you wanted to destroy a cable very secretly, you would say there was bad weather, drop your anchor, radio distress message, pick your anchor up again. You would cover it. But they're doing it in a way they almost don't care if they get caught. This election interference here is actually very brazen. There have been some Russian operations in the past which have been very well concealed, and it's quite hard to put a finger on them. But mostly they operate with their two fingers up in our direction, I would say. Do you agree?
On the presidency website, you have the classified documents regarding the elections. To comment more than it's on those documents, for me, it would mean to speculate, and I wouldn't do that.
I think the documents clearly point the finger at Russia. But what I like to highlight, because there have been plenty of books written on this, it's not something that we don't know, is that there is also a pattern of engaging. Sometimes, and I noticed something today in the press, in the French press. So it's not unusual for Russia to try actually to use that opportunity to create more havoc. Like what? Like, for instance, trying, of course, to support this candidate, but at the same time, some of the ties to link to allies of Romania, like Poland. There was a company in Warsaw that seems to have used money to pay for these influencers. Why would you do that? Because then it's reported in the Romanian press, and then there is kind of impression that is created, and of course you want to divide and conquer. So the relationship between Romania and Poland, and that's not unusual in terms of how Russia operates. I've done a study a few years ago for the Baltics. It was the same thing all over, trying to divide Lithuanians against the Polish, trying to divide the Polish against Ukrainians. Because, as we know, history is very bad in this region, but it's very bad in many other places. So they try to scratch the wounds that were supposed to be healed, and then to reopen them. Polish against Ukrainians, Polish against Lithuanians. So when I saw that report about a company in Poland, and guess what? Apparently it was operated by Ukrainians, just to add a little bit of flavor. You know, this is how Russian patterns operate. So the thing is that you have to understand this and not, again, see in the media, I hope they will not fall for this and say, well, you know, the Polish company is involved in, operated by Ukrainians. And then you can see the populists, how much it's going to exploit that. But it's part. And so sometimes they mask, but, you know, the masking is not very, I mean, and we have books, we have studies. It's not something that we don't know from now and from the period of, in the 60s, when the Action Measures Department 61 was established, the disinformation was established in 1921. The Active Measures was established. They used to run about 300, 400 active measures per year. So they have experience, what I'm saying. And what has happened during the Cold War, and it's happening again, especially in Romania, and the Western countries didn't actually believe that active measures need to be paid attention. You know, I said, well, this is Russian game. But they were very effective, and there were several cases in which you can show effectiveness. When I saw, for instance, last year, remember there were in Paris some swastikas, or no, there was something anti-Jewish, anti-Israeli signs in Paris on different walls. That was something taken from a shelf somewhere in Moscow, because the same thing happened in Germany in the 50s. And that they wanted to exploit the sentiment related to the war in Gaza and to inflame the situation in Paris. And guess what? Who was involved in painting those things? Citizens of the Republic of Moldova, Maia Sandu and Macron. They have a very close relationship to support the European integration. So always find ways to basically create these cracks. So why create only one crack between Russia and Romania when you can actually throw a few Ukrainians, throw the Polish, and then you make a big fuss? So the masking is not that, I mean, for those who study that, it's not it's not masking at all.
Thank you. I suggest we finish here with the questions so we have time for the more joyful moment of the evening. I would like to thank again our distinguished guests, Professor Bjola, journalist Edward Lucas, and General Petrescu.
Domnul Alexandru Ștefan, CFA. Mulțumesc frumos. Domnul Cristian Grigore Sabou, CFA. Doamna Beatriz Lavinia Radui, CFA. Doamna Miruna Roxana Patruții, CFA. Felicitări. Domnul Carol Ștefan Peterfi, CFA. Doamna Diana Pașca, CFA. Doamna Nicoleta Loscaru, CFA. Domnul Alexandru Ioan, CFA. Doamna Crina Fotescu. Arina Fotescu, scuze. CFA. Domnul Paul Dobrescu, CFA. Doamna Andreea Mădălina Constantin, CFA. Domnul Daniel Mihăiță Ciocoiu, CFA. Domnul Georgian Bogdan Chiriță, CFA. Și ultima diplomă, doamna Oana Mihaela Bogdan, CFA.